Welcome to the Pastor's Podcast. Pastor Scott and Pastor Jim here.
Hello.
We just finished the service. We did the service together, and now we're doing a podcast together. This is great.
It's lovely. It's great.
It's great. I got my foot up. Feel like my foot up, but Laura's like, do you want to stay? And I'm like, I'm in gear. Let's do it. I just preached twice. I'm in gear. Like, let's, knock this out.
The adrenaline is flowing.
Exactly. And which I feel particularly after the last couple of months. I'm like, this is a sensation I'm thankful for. Let's keep this going. So podcasting it is.
Okay.
How are you doing, Jim?
I'm doing great. I'm just fine. Yeah, that's great. I just hate to see it. No, I'm not sure when people are hearing this, but right now, here at the beginning of September, it is oven hot. Oh. And that's just not what happens around here this close to the ocean. So
no, it's kind of wild. They'll probably be feeling a little bit of this because, we'll release it this week. I don't know how long this is supposed to last, but walking out the front door today was wild.
Yeah. Bam. You hit that wall.
I have a not insignificant property tax bill, and people have not insignificant rents. And this is not the weather we pay for.
What are our taxes going for?
That's right.
I imagine this leads right into our podcast because
fair. Okay.
Yeah. So this building was built before air conditioning, before there was such a thing as air conditioning, and so what they put in were these giant fans in the ceiling that would blow the hot air around in the room is what it really did. And that was the equivalent.
Well, so I was just having this thought today. We talk about the church history.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just that this building was built without air conditioning. The sanctuary didn't. The sanctuary?
Mm-hmm.
You like how I said that? Sanctuary. The sanctuary did not have air conditioning until last year.
No, it did not.
Right?
You're absolutely right.
And when I walked out my house this morning, I was like, oh, the sanctuary has air conditioning. I was uniquely thankful.
Me too.
For this upgrade, long awaited upgrade. There are generations of people that have worshiped in pooling sweat for years in this building, and this morning was different than that.
And even worse, I can't find. I don't know where it is. It's disappeared, I think. But there was a 16mm movie made of a church service here. There was a company that went around, news. I think it was a news organization. They went around to this at all the church, several churches in LA, and this is considered one of the bigger churches, so they did one here. And you can see all these people. The room is packed, which is great. Everybody's wearing like lots of clothes. The men are all in suits and ties, the women are all in jackets and things and big hats. And it was done in the middle of summer, and it looks like everybody is just about to melt in that thing.
Gosh.
So
it wasn't just that there was no air conditioning. The cultural requirement.
Yes. Yeah,
was also
real issue. Yeah, you didn't dress less because it was hot. You wore the same.
You wore your church clothes.
You wore your church clothes. You had to. Yeah, that was a big deal.
Oh my goodness.
So, and I would talk to some of the older women in church who had been around that day, and they said they just dreaded coming on summer Sundays. Evenings were pretty good, but
they did. But they came nonetheless.
They came.
A lesson for our generation.
Yeah. So sacrifice for your faith, right?
That's right.
So this reminds me of those days. I didn't experience them nearly as much as many people did, but I did experience it some.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because by your time you were at least allowed to take off your jacket.
Yes, we could. Yes, I did. I remember a lady coming up and scolding me for doing that.
No, are you serious?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For taking off your jacket?
Yeah. She said, literally, in my time, a man would never have taken off his jacket, and I'm shocked that you did, or something like that. And it's like, fortunately, she was a real sweetheart, So I said, I'm very sorry I offended you. Yeah, there are lots of those traditions that were still around, and it was still just as hot. And it's only been the last, as you say, year that, this is probably the best test of this system. We were all comfortable in there today, I thought.
Oh yeah, no, it was great.
Yeah,
it was. Sometimes, and we're finally like zeroing in on the right air conditioning because It's been freezing in the sanctuary a few Sundays over the last year as we've gotten used to this newfangled contraption and haven't quite figured out how to work it right. But I feel like we're zeroing in on the right temperature for the room.
Yeah. So
today was a good day.
Those of you in the future who are listening to this podcast from today, this I guess is history too now.
No, apparently, exactly.
Figuring out the AC.
So on a related note,
yes.
I don't think I can hear it in my headphones, but if somebody hears a little bit of a whir or a ticking sound, that's because the air conditioning's on in this room and I'm not turning it off.
Huh. No. Shortly after it went off, we would go off, probably just faint dead on the floor.
The ticking is that a lot of these rooms have timers for the air conditioning, which, for the record, I actually really appreciate.
Yep.
I thought it was really annoying when I first got here. It was like there's like timers in every room. But you only have to walk into a couple of rooms after the air conditioning was left on all weekend and be like, just feels really bad.
Or the worst is when you get halfway home and you think, did I turn the AC off in that room, or is it still going all night?
Well, and now we're to another generation of things because now Jose has them all, controls them all like on an app on his phone. So he just sits at home and like turns them off.
So we better be nice to Jose.
Well, exactly. All right. So we've been talking about church history. Maybe we should get into it. This is part 2 of the Cornerstone Church History. I have heard from a number of people who really, really enjoyed your thoughts and just your ability to both tell the story and impart the story to us last time, Jim. And so I know that a number of people are really looking forward to this. So I'm looking forward to it too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad. I think part of God's plan for kind of gluing me here for multiple decades is that I wound up, when I first came, meeting some of the people that were here in the times now that we're talking about, from the 30s on up. So some of this is not from written information. Some of it's from people that I knew, and I'm honored to be able to represent them too.
Yeah.
So the 30s was an interesting time in the church. It was an interesting time in the country. Of course, the country was struggling.
So just for context, you and I talked about this, but I don't think we've talked about it recorded. So we were talking about how to break this up. So we first did kind of the start of the church up through the 20s.
Right.
Today we're going to talk about the 30s and up to the start of the war. Is that what we decided?
Yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah,
somewhere around there. Okay. So starting the 30s. So you said the 30s was an interesting time in the life of the church.
It was difficult because, I mean, if you listen to the first podcast, we kind of hinted at it, but we didn't hit hard that the church had a lot of financial problems from the very beginning. When they first started the church, they were meeting in a schoolhouse, and the man who was the pastor loaned the church money to buy a lot. Then they owed him money and they couldn't pay him back. And so then that was a huge issue. And so he quit. That was typical for the time. So it wasn't unusual. But there was an organization in LA, Los Angeles Baptist Association, I think it was called, that loaned money to people who wanted to start churches. And so this church took out several loans from them. They were low interest. They were kind on paying it back, as best you could. And those repeated loans are what kept this church going for the early years, 20s, and well into the 30s when everybody was in financial trouble, including that organization. But they continued to give out money as best they could.
It's interesting because it strikes me. We talked about how thankful we were that the church survived the last couple of years in the pandemic and everything. And I remember talking early on in the pandemic with someone, another leader in the church, and I was like, well, it just gives me hope that the church always survives, and the church just, and he looks at me and says, well, I mean, Cornerstone might not survive, but the church definitely will. I was like, thanks for the encouragement. But church. when we think about the 30s, right, this is the Great Depression.
Yes, that's the Great Depression.
Right? 29, the big, and so
nobody has money.
I can't imagine them thinking about what is it like for a church to try to survive a moment like that. And
things like pay the pastor's salary. And one of the pastors quit because they couldn't pay his salary, and they kept saying, "Well, we'll get it for you. We'll pay you back." But he didn't. He wasn't comfortable with that, so he left. Other pastors were able to accept a delay, and sometimes they got another loan to pay the pastor so they could keep him here. So a continuing challenge through that time to be able to support the cost of the church. And they were already in this building, of course. They were already here where we are now.
So even after the building, they were taking out loans just for operations?
For operation, yes. Oh. Salaries. There weren't many salaries. Usually there was a part-time secretary, and they'd give a little honorarium to the organist or something like that. And then the pastor's salary was the main salary.
But they were also needing to pay, I'm imagining, the mortgage on the land?
Pay the mortgage, pay off the original property was still being paid off. There were repairs or all kinds of other things going on. Yeah. I remember reading the brickwork began to crumble at some point, and they began to have to repair the bricks. And there's a whole other fascinating. We should do a podcast on how the building was actually built, because it was kind of unique. The bricks didn't really hold the building up, and they weren't actually a part of the building. They were separate from the building, oddly. So,
really,
it seems to, yes.
What was the building made of then?
Well, the building
was framed?
Was built on two huge steel H girders, two upright girders with a girder cross between them that welded together.
Maybe we did talk about this a little bit, or maybe it was just you and me. I can't remember if it was the podcast or not.
Well, and it was an earthquake. It designed to withstand an earthquake, which it did. The big 1933 earthquake that wrecked the bell tower. Uh-huh. The bell tower was just bricks stacked on bricks. But the building itself survived that and just rocked back and forth. And all the bricks, the way the bricks were attached to the building was, as they built the building, they would hammer a piece of tin into the wood, and then they'd bring the piece of tin out, just like a straight out. And then when they did the brickwork, that was where the cement went between the bricks. So the bricks were held to the building with this piece of tin that was nailed in the wood and cemented between the bricks. And there were like thousands of those all around the church. But what happened was that those all came loose. All the bricks came loose in the earthquake. And so even though they had the building and it looked okay, the bricks were not attached to the building. And that situation continued until much later, past the time we're talking about, when the bricks began to fall off the building in another earthquake. But I always thought it was a brick building, and everybody else did too. But it was not. And it rode out the earthquake because it wasn't on those two big H frames. It just kind of rode back and forth like a kid on a swing, sort of.
That's so fascinating. That's wild.
I don't know. Yeah, isn't that something?
I mean, so many things you take for granted. I think I've always just seen the brick building, and they're like, wow, they made this well. Yeah. Look, it's still a brick building. They built it in 1922. It's still, there's so much of that I take for granted and I don't even realize.
Yeah, I think we replaced the bricks 3 times now.
Okay, so one of the themes going on, particularly in the early 30s and throughout, was this financial crisis. Yes. What else was going on in the life of the church? Like, how did they? I almost wonder how they navigated it interpersonally, spiritually, when the financial pressure was so intense.
Yeah. The people I knew, I think were fairly embarrassed about the struggles that the church had, many of which were caused by the finances. It was very hard to get anybody to talk about that.
Interesting.
Yeah, they were, I think, ashamed, embarrassed. I don't know how they felt, but I think we're
embarrassed about the finances, or embarrassed about that season in the life of the church.
The season of the life of the church, the fighting that went on, the disputes. There was an attempt to sort of do a takeover by people who thought that it was being mismanaged financially or spiritually or theologically, and those fights, I think, were engendered in large part because of the stresses of the times and some of the other things going on. So it was not a great time. Church did not grow rapidly. It did grow, but very slowly. They tried to do like buy an organ. That was also difficult. At one point, they wanted to appoint a second pastor, but they couldn't get the money to do it, so they had to give up on that. So just a number of, like, I guess maybe typical church crises, but in that that time, it played more difficultly, I think, because of the financial strain that everybody was under. I mean, people were jobless. There were people who were homeless, not quite like we're homeless today, but people who were living in a home that they had already been reclaimed. They failed to make their mortgage payments, but they didn't move out, and they didn't get thrown out because nobody else. They couldn't make any money on it anyway. They couldn't rent it.
Okay, so that strikes something to me. It makes me wonder about what this community was like in the 30s, because I think we think of this as a area that's, I mean, obviously now really expensive, right? A difficult place to live for that reason. But because of that, it also kind of feels the broader economic pain, like it feels it last, right?
Yeah.
Because it's filled with, so many resources. Was that West LA wasn't like that back then?
No.
What was the community like? What was the community around this church like?
Well, it's an odd mix. So the places that were growing were building out from downtown Los Angeles and at the beach.
Okay.
And we were kind of between those two. So there was the streetcar line still went through the middle of town, and people still would come, and they would stop here, and they'd get sodas or something like that. Then they'd go onto the beach. And UCLA was just beginning. They moved out to where they are now in 1924, I believe. And but then they just kind of slowly grew. They didn't grow very fast at all at that point. The VA hospital, which was the main employer in the area, was still there, and it was continuing to function, and was a very large employer in the area. And so this area was Sawtelle, and there are many poor houses here. There were some wealthier people, but it was still a very struggling area. Beyond us and east of us, things were growing. This wasn't doing that well. It was slowly growing, but not doing the same at all. And
so the church then was almost like a small town church.
Yes, that would be a very good picture of it.
Okay.
And there were several. It was like 6 or 7 churches. It wasn't like this is the only one.
Yeah.
But all the churches apparently were not faring well in that time. That's why I think we went through 3 pastors in there, and why they had problems with money, and they wanted to buy an organ. I think did I already mention that? And there's one organ that they bought and defaulted on, and they came and took it out. There was another one they tried to buy, and they couldn't. I think they couldn't even raise the money to get it started, so they didn't get it. So it was and salaries were not paid. It was just a very difficult time. But it was difficult not just for the church employees. It was difficult for everybody who was coming as well.
Yeah.
They were all having problems with it. So it was a tough time economically. Spiritually, it seemed to be doing okay as far as I can tell. There were no fights over theology. There were no issues. People were very church-oriented. It was an important thing.
Okay, so you said that people didn't like talking about it because there were some leadership tensions. But so was that maybe like organizationally there were tensions, but spiritually people were doing well, or what?
As far as I can tell from both what's written and what people said, people didn't question spiritual issues or theological issues quite so much as we might today. There was a sense that, I think a cultural sense that we listen to the experts and we do, what they tell us. We don't argue with the experts. So there was less of that. There were, but there was also less, I think, respect for the church. There was a sort of a formal respect, but socially, in the way that we would say, morally perhaps, less so. And so the way people lived might be that they might be married. A man might be married and have a family, and also be dating a secretary at work, and they'd still come to he and his wife and children still come to church, and they would not share that with anyone. That would just be their private issue. Not quite as public as we are today about these, and also not as willing to seek help about things like that.
And so during this time, you said there was just kind of a turning over. So during the 30s,
Yes.
there were a number of different pastors.
Yes.
So there wasn't like a solid pastoral presence that was able to navigate through this. It was kind of just a more small town church community.
Yes.
That people went to because that was
and
what
the main,
they did.
Yeah, and the main thing the pastor was supposed to do was, well, two really, run the church and preach on Sunday. And a couple of them were more involved in that. But I think it was a difficult assembly, a difficult membership, because pastors who seemed to be the more serious pastors did not seem to do as well with the church. It was like, you have a role to do. You preach on Sunday.
You run the organization. You preach on Sunday.
And stay out of my life. So I'm not sure that's entirely true of everyone, but it seemed to be more in the culture than it is today, oddly. Yeah. Although I think in some ways today we back away from the church. But in those days, you were in the church no matter what was going on, because that was part of culture. And so I think you brought your sin, your plans for how to relieve the pressures in your life with you.
Yeah.
And everybody sort of looked the other way. Was
it still when I think of like small town churches, was it the type of town where the question wasn't, do you go to church? But the question was where you go to church.
Yes.
So everybody went to church.
Everybody went to church. Yeah.
Okay. That was just kind of the norm. And I think that would then feed, it's something that a lot of us don't have any experience with in our lifetimes, but exists, has existed more, we're more familiar with it in the Bible Belt and in other places. More foreign here now, but that's what, in the 30s, that's what it was like here.
Yeah, very much. The equivalent today would be like we all start across the intersection before the light turns green. Actually,
yeah,
5 seconds before, we kind of know that's the zone where we have a number of things that we sort of as a community agree to do that aren't quite totally the law.
Yeah.
Well, there were a whole set of those, I think, that very much affected the country in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
The war kind of broke all that up, but this is prior to that.
Yeah.
So it was a holdover from the whole from 1900 on, pretty much what the urban culture was developing into.
Was it primarily or exclusively a white community and church at that point?
Yes.
It was?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was.
There wasn't diversity amongst the area of the church at that point.
Yeah, there was a mention of one black woman who was part of the church who was in the choir, a great singer, but there's a sense you have that somehow she was a part of the white culture, that she had that, but there was certainly, I think, profound segregation. And it was expected. It wasn't like anybody even talked about it. It's hardly mentioned. The fact that the one black woman is mentioned, I think, tells you, how remarkable it was. But the mention of her is that she was so sweet, or something. And so there was cross connection. Oddly enough, there's no mention of Hispanic people in the culture being part of this church. So I think more so perhaps than black, Hispanic may have been a dividing line.
And maybe a part of the community, maybe possibly a part of the community, but not a part of the church.
They might be neighbors in the community.
Yeah,
they might be. And your kids might play with their kids, but they would go to their church, and you would not. And no one, when I asked about language, it seemed that the issue was no one expected anybody who was Hispanic to speak English, although there were clearly people who did. If you did sales or something like that, you would. But I think there was a sense that this is a natural language barrier, that if you're Spanish, you would go to a Spanish-speaking church.
Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think there's so much of the history of Los Angeles and even of West Los Angeles that we just don't even have like pictures for. Okay, where do you learn this stuff? Where do you get the pictures of the makeup of the community? And again, pre-war, civil rights movement.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah. Economic hard times.
Yeah, this is all very.
Yeah.
Was there? Did you get a sense of? You might not even know the answer to this question, but was there segregation among the white population? Like, so I know, in different eras, whether it was like the Irish that were looked down on, or did that exist to your knowledge here in any direction, or was the segregation primarily racial?
It seemed to me it was more racial, but that's another issue where it's not. No one mentions it. No one says, "Well, we actually had some Irish people come," or something.
Yeah.
And to some extent, I think Los Angeles has always been some mix of races, but they've generally been kind of isolated by area.
Yeah.
But interact with each other, even in the very beginning. Like most of Santa Monica was owned by a Mexican gentleman before it became Santa Monica, who was very wealthy and interacted a lot with white people. But everybody was kind of marveled that he spoke both English and Spanish. That's how few interactions there were. So I get a flavor that there was a agreed upon kind of different from where we are today. Sense that you're fine with your people and we're fine with our people, and let's no harm, no foul, but let's do that.
Interesting.
And I think the war is what changed a lot of that.
So wow. Okay, I'm gonna put a pin in that. I've got so many questions. I want to. We promised to do the next episode. It's going to be on the war season, war years, and the transition and the transformation that took place,
huge transition,
and how that affected. This is I'm fascinated by. But okay, so in those years leading up to the war, so the 30s, even into the early 40s, maybe even just from the people that you knew that were here back then, or things that you read, were there any, what stands out to you as maybe some highlights of the life of the church during that season? Or were there?
The things people talked about, or that there's some of it's in the history, but the things I heard most were people were very proud of the changes in the church. Like they got a new organ. Then they had to give it up because they couldn't pay for it. But they just loved that new organ. They thought it was great. They rearranged the rooms. Our sanctuary now is bigger than it was originally because they needed to change some things and build some hallways. They needed to make a space for the children were upstairs where we are right now doing this podcast was one of the children's rooms. And so they had children's rooms up here and had a huge children's program. And the sanctuary had to be pushed back to make it much smaller so they could have these rooms up here. And so the whole design of the place was quite different. They had a lot of children. And then after the war, they had even more, but that's a whole other topic. The idea that this building was everything, it had to house everything, is something we don't. So we already talked about the bell tower being where the pastor's office was. He was the only employee. Sanctuary is where the sanctuary is, but it where the balcony ends now is where it was the end of the sanctuary in those days. The side room where we sit when we're trying to duck out early or whatever. That was a whole separate. That was a room you could separate or open, and it was a whole separate. That was the where they would have dinner or things like that. And the lobby on the patio side was the kitchen. And for a long time, when I first came, the sink and washstand were all still there. They were just covered up. So it was a very different configuration from where we are now, but it was all done in one building. And so that it didn't tolerate much flexibility. The things were designed for what they were, and you did that there. So I don't know where that leaves us, but it was a matter of this is what we got and this is who we are, and we're not thinking ahead particularly. We're just doing this.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think of Brian was asking just the other day of the random side rooms in what's now S11.
Yes.
Like where in the world did this come from? In my head, it may not have, but in my head, it like came from this era, right? Where you're
yes,
like, and now we can't even imagine what they would have used that space for. But even in the family room, there's all these tiny little rooms. And I think we're like, well, what would you ever use a room that size for, right? I mean, the thing's like 5 by 5 or something, I'm not even sure I could lay down in it. But they were maximizing every little bit of this because this was all of it. This was the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And so their theory was, or their practice, I guess I should say, you took like the room we're in was the same as that down there at one point. And so it was all the rooms here pretty much were the same thing. And what you did was you had a center room where all the kids would come and you have like them all sing together, have a program. Yeah. And then they would go in little groups into the side rooms to get their Sunday school lesson in groups of like 5 or 6. And you have like, the 4 different age groups and they would sing together and then they go into 4 different kinds of lessons. Yeah. So that was classic Sunday school in the day. And that was developed in the 30s and this church was very modern in doing that and having that built into the architecture. Yeah.
Okay, so in another 100 years, when they talk about us, there's a part of me that really hopes they don't talk about what we did with the building. I'm like what? That's to me not the most significant. Although in a different era, what they did with the building may have been kind of the thing that they were most proud of and spent the most time focused on. What did you get a sense for the highlights of the spiritual life? Were there highlights of the spiritual life, or was it more of a kind of organization? I don't know. Were there highlights of their spiritual lives that were retold? Were there missionaries even at that point? Were they sending out or multiplying? Or like you said, was it just kind of about the moment?
There were not missionaries. And the issue was, you kind of evangelize your own community, basically, and they can evangelize their community. There wasn't a sense of us going somewhere to do something for somebody else at that point. That came after World War II, I think. Okay. It came hugely out of World War II. It was a big explosion where all these guys went overseas to fight, and they came back and said, hey, they don't know anything about Jesus over there. Yeah. But here, I think the issue in the 30s was A, on surviving financially, B, on everything was about your children and getting your children to understand about Jesus. That was a really, really high priority. So that's what they did. There was some evangelism and there was some talk about people who came in church saved, and that was some of the interesting racial talk. They'd say, well, actually, a black woman who worked as a maid for one of the women in the church came to Christ, and so she came, and it was like that was extraordinary. But hey, we saved somebody, and that's great. So she can worship with us until she finds a black church. But the emphasis was definitely on doing something for the children. So that's why all these rooms were upstairs were built for that. And then with the first building that they built, well, that's not true. The second building they built was the building where the basketball court is, and that's all Sunday school rooms.
Yeah. Okay, so were there like somebody got a motorcycle outside?
Yeah, somebody cranked up a big one.
Is there anything from that era that you legacy-wise that you hope we will emulate, or is it just kind of the church was passed down and we're thankful for the Lord's faithfulness to that, and that He kind of grew and expanded our heart and vision since then? Or I don't know. When you think about the 30s, is there anything that sticks with you that you hope to remember or not?
Yeah, no. Actually, there's a lot. I think very compassionately of people who grew up and tried to do church in the 30s. I think it was a terrible time. There were people on the road who had no place they're just looking for work. There are all kinds of people who were starving out of work, couldn't find anything to do. People who were professionals who were digging ditches. It was a very, very, if you read American history, it was a very, very tough time for the culture. Very hard, economically desperate time. And these people managed to figure out how to borrow, beg, trade, get some money to build a church building. It's a pretty good one. It's lasted all these years, and it was well designed. Every square inch of it was put to use, and they didn't spare where the children were concerned. That was their and they, I think, even though they couldn't pay their pastors, they seemed to revere their pastors and care for them. I think there are many things to learn from that generation, but we don't have nearly the constraints that they did. And I think that we don't learn much from them because we look back and say, well, it couldn't have been that hard. But it was. It was very hard, and they did church anyway. So that they were directed, that they did the best they could, that they failed a lot, particularly on the financial end, and had, a repossessed organ and pastors who left because they didn't pay their salary. There are all those issues, but they weathered those and kept going. And so I think what they did and their determination to be a body of Christ worshipers in this place, a growing place, a place where people were moving to. There's a little university nearby, not much, but there were actual jobs here at the Veterans Old Folks Home that paid good salaries, so they had some money. And a lot of that money was sacrificed to go into this, establishing a physical presence in this growing place. So I think we owe them that. They didn't get as much done as we might have hoped. You look at what happened post-World War II, my gosh. But they did, I think, with very tight circumstances, the best they could. And I'm all for them. Good on them.
Man, that's so helpful. Such a helpful perspective. I feel my own heart gravitating to maybe even an unfair evaluation based on my life experience, at least at this point, right? 41 years in, there's nothing in my life that could even begin to allow me to comprehend the difficulty, and not just the difficulty of one person or one family or one, destituted, but of life in and coming through and out of the Great Depression. And like you said, doing church, being church anyway.
Yes.
Sacrificing what little they had for the sake of one another, for the sake of the gospel. I think even I feel like your words corrected my heart in a beautiful way, because I think that there is a way that it's easy to downplay others' sacrifices, and I'm not sure I've ever sacrificed anything to the level that it to feel that pain and that squeeze and sacrifice for the sake of the church still.
Yes.
In any ways, and to prioritize that is pretty amazing.
Yes. And particularly I think the fact that the times before them, the economic times were good. To come into that and feel the loss of it. I think that it's a very small modeling of that, but coming into the time of COVID, where we find ourselves restricted in many ways, is a little tiny taste of that. Like we're not doing as much as we could be doing right now if we weren't so trapped, I guess, by this.
Because we remember the times. Because we remember the times when we did.
Yes, exactly.
And so now we're not just in it, but we're in it and remember the times when.
Yes, and so we're depressed, we're mad, we're whatever, and it may be it looks like it may be a long time coming out of this. If we come out, we assume that we'll just start living with it and forget it's there. But my guess is that we are in a 30-ish kind of mode, because they were trapped in an economic nightmare themselves, and there are like 2/3 of the number of jobs they needed to have everybody employed. So a whole bunch of people were out of work and couldn't find anything. And they survived. Well, they didn't all survive, but the culture survived, and they did something. They did what they could. And I think that's a real good lesson for us. There are seasons when you do what you can, and there are seasons when you have abundance and you do a lot, or maybe you waste it. I don't know, but the challenges are different.
Yeah, and what's interesting is you think about the fruit that came from this place, from that same church family, from a lot of those same people.
Yes.
Through the church in the 40s.
Yes.
And after the war. You see that as the Lord who had carried this community through the 30s.
Yes.
And into the time of the war, him knowing what was coming, knowing what was ahead, and knowing what he was preparing for, knowing the work that he was doing all along, that looks very different in different seasons.
Yeah.
In the lives, in each of our individual lives, and in the life of a church family.
Yeah. And in the culture, I think, at large. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's helpful. It's helpful. It inspires my heart to worship. I think it reorients my heart and my view in a helpful way. And so I'm so thankful for that. Thanks, Jim.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Anything else on your notepad from the 30s up into the war that we missed? You hoped that we'd get to talk about?
No, I think that what I would say is. It's really important, I think, not to lose track of where the country was and where Christians and people in this church were when that time came. It came suddenly, it came harshly, it came explosively, quite literally. And it's not, you don't want to lose track of where everybody was when they then turned and became something. They became heroes, basically. So I think we'll look at that next time.
Wow. I can't wait. I mean, what a transformation for the culture, for the people, and for the church.
You if you think about it, you'll see why there was such an explosion of things when you think about how it was pent up during the 30s before.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, next time we'll do that. We'll jump into the war years and the 40s and explore what the Lord had in store then. And thanks again. This is such an enjoyment. I know I'm really enjoying it, and I know our church family is. It's just another inspires our worship for a Lord that has been so faithful to this church family for so many years.
It does mine. Yeah. So how long did we take for the 30s? Did we take the whole time?
Yeah. We're at like 42 minutes.
All right.
It's not bad.
It's a lot there.
You were sure. I think there's a lot there. It's great. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Jim.
Yeah.
And thanks everybody for listening. We love you, and we'll see you on Sunday.